How's everybody doing today? My name is Troy Klunick. I'm in this first set of presentations, and I'm going to be presenting Painting with Numbers by Randall Bolton. Um, I have the first 4 chapters. I believe we're getting further into the book next week, so hopefully I can lay a decent foundation so the next presenter can hopefully relay more exciting information to you guys. The 4 chapters that I have are numerals matter, looks matter, words matter, and then finally your audience matters. I do have a PDF on Blackboard if everyone could go pull that up or print that out. I think you can get the gist of it without printing it out, but please feel free. So go ahead and grab that. If you need to pause this, go ahead. So the first chapter is numerals matter, which just kind of goes into how to present the numbers in these full reports that he keeps referencing. So that first, on the PDF, the first figure, we can do a little exercise here. If you go ahead and cover up 2 of the 3 columns there, version A, version B, and version C, just leaving 1, if you could go ahead and figure out just which column presents itself the best, that'd be appreciated. And if you do that, you can obviously see that version A is going to present itself the best. Bolton, he lays the book out and he has these deadly sins, which is within these chapters, which he wants to make everyone aware of. So these deadly sins are some things that you cannot do when presenting these numbers or words in these reports. So the first deadly sin is just always write justify columns of numbers. As you can tell, the larger numbers will stand out, which present better for your audience. The commas in the column line up, which makes this easier to do simple math between a few numbers if someone needs to, and it just simply looks better. Then the second thing with this figure is the units of measure. Whenever you do have a table or figure, you do want to put the units of measure somewhere on there. Version A and version B have 2 different acceptable forms of doing this. In version A, as you can see, the dollar sign is in the first and in the total. I prefer that one. I think that one presents itself better than version B because the total line, you do have that units of measure, and that total line is most likely going to be an important line. But version B is acceptable also, presenting that units of measure just in the heading of the column. The one thing he did not want you to do is put the units of measure in every line. He presents it in the book, and it does look messy, and it makes the information just harder to read. Another thing with this is presenting the numbers, how you want to present them. The figure here just presents the full numbers. I don't have them in thousands, but if you are getting into large numbers, do you want to present them in the thousands, in the hundreds, in the millions? And that's really going to depend on the information and your audience. So if you know you have a boss that wants it all the way down to the cent, you're obviously going to do that. If it's for a budget, you're obviously not going to want to go down to the cents. It really is going to depend on the audience and just how you're going to have to use some judgment in seeing which presents the best and which comes across as easily understandable. So the second chapter goes into looks matter, and here's where this is where he really dives into like these reports, like larger documents with multiple figures, multiple tables. He dives into whether you should use portrait or landscape. Um, Bolton does prefer landscape. He thinks it is a better option. Um, it is going to depend on the information that you have. If you do have a large document with multiple tables and multiple figures, I think landscape might be better. You can fit you can fit a bigger table on landscape. Uh, Bolton gave us rough numbers, rough estimates of acceptable uh, maximums of rows and columns. In portrait, he says a rough maximum is 45 rows and then only 8 columns. And then landscape is 30 rows, but then you can fit in 13 columns. So it's going to depend on the information. But the most important part is consistency. If you have a large report with multiple figures, like I've been saying, you want to present them in all landscape or in all portrait. If you flip-flop, this can get really irritating for your audience, and you can obviously see why that could be a problem. Consistency is going to be a theme throughout this presentation. It's very important. It makes the information, if you present it consistently, seem much more professional, and it just makes it easier for the audience. They'll know what to look for, they'll know what to read, and how to obtain the information that's needed to be obtained. So again, with presenting looks matter, Bolton refers to white areas, and he says white areas are your friend. It can help you separate important information. It can help you separate columns. It can help you separate a lot of information. It help you group information. If you're looking on a 3-month basis, you can group it in 3 months. In the figure on the PDF, I used white areas to separate the headings and then the total. If you do separate the totals a little bit with a little white area, it makes them stick out a little bit more. It's really about presenting that information in the best way possible. Another thing that he pointed out is to keep the important information, important numbers, important totals on the outside of the table. So on most figures or tables, you're going to have the left side with your headings, the top with your headings. So that leaves the bottom and the right side for hopefully that important information. And that's just something that he kind of researched, was pointing out that this is easier for the reader. Obviously, if you're presenting important information in the middle of the table, it's going to be harder to locate that information. Okay, another thing with looks matter is the column and the rows, the spacing of these. So the height of the rows and the width of the columns. Another deadly sin of Bolton's was not to base the height and column of your rows and your height of your rows and the width of your columns on your captions. So I've done this, I'm sure everyone else has done this. You've double clicked on the little XL middle of the row, and it'll just automatically go to the length of the caption. And he wants you to stay away from this. If you get into the habit of that, you might have rows and columns that are not even. They don't present as best as they can. So you might have to thoughtfully shorten some of these captions, just so that information in the table comes across as well as it can. Another thing is just some borders, shadings, and other visual effects within your tables and within your figures. These can be effective, like bold, italics, shading. They can point to important information, which can be very helpful. But the one thing you want to stay away from is using these for any other reason than clarifying, than distinguishing information. If you're going to use them, they need to add meaning to the information. They need to help the figure, help the table. You don't want to just jazz up a table for no reason. So it's a matter of preference. I mean, we've all done tables and we've all done figures, and bolding totals or bolding key numbers or shading them can be very, very useful and very helpful. So the next chapter is going to be words. Words matter. They in your tables and in your figures, he's referencing like the headings. He's referencing the title. As graduate accounting students, as I read this chapter, I didn't think that it pertained to us as much. The main thing I took out of it is just say what you mean and mean what you say. So, I mean, obviously we should know the difference between revenues and profits, and anyone that's reading those reports should probably know the difference between those. So just don't mess those up. That's a deadly sin of his, is just make sure your headings are properly presented. So that chapter didn't really have as much in it that was pertaining to us. But it did touch on abbreviations, which the abbreviations goes back to the last topic of shortening captions. So if you do need to shorten captions, you can use these abbreviations. On the PDF, I have listed some common abbreviations. Some of them you might know, some of them you might not. These are common abbreviations, accepted abbreviations. A key there is whenever you do use abbreviations, you should put a period after the abbreviation to show that it is an abbreviation. So hopefully that can be of a little assistance to you. If not, oh well. So then finally we have your audience matters, and this one, it's more of judgment, but I think it is very important, and one of the probably one of the things that needs to be thought about more, that probably doesn't get thought about. Who are you presenting this information to? So Bolton listed 5 things that you want to achieve with any audience, and I'll go through those 5 things. The first one is you want to find the right amount of data, and you want to present the right amount of data to whatever audience. So to do this, I think he's targeting kind of the young professional, kind of like us, that we might get into a situation where we're writing reports and we are making these figures and tables for maybe our bosses or maybe for a meeting, and we're going to have to figure out who it's for and present it properly. So he said there's ways to get the right amount of data, not too little, not too much. And he says there's three things you can do to help yourself out. You can go ahead and ask your audience. If it's for a large number of people, you can pick out a few people and ask them exactly what key information they're expecting. Just ask them questions like that to get an idea of what amount of data you want. Another way is to ask a trusted colleague, a friend, a knowledgeable person, which is going to be key, to review your reports, and then hopefully help you out in that way. And the last way Bolton said would be to go ask a so-called expert. Go ask someone who has done the reports, who has had success with reports. Just questions about what's expected from the audience. Um, Obviously, your reports may change if it's going to a boss or to a colleague, like I said earlier, and it's a good way to. I thought that would be a good way to get that information, and Bolton, I feel like, has a point with that. All right, so the second thing you want to accomplish is appropriate emphasis on critical information, and this is kind of linked with number one. Um, Depending on what the reports are for, you want to emphasize the correct information, and that's kind of self-explanatory. The third is consistency, and that's a big one. You want to be consistent throughout your report. Like I said, if you're going to use landscape, use landscape. Another deadly sin that he said is you want to put a title and a timestamp on every page or every report or graph within the report, every table or figure, and you want that in the same area on every page. So it's a consistency thing. Your audience is going to be able to read your information more easily once they get used to it. They're going to be able to obtain the information that they need quicker and in a more efficient way. And it's not only between every table and every figure, it's going to be between every report. So with your first report, if you have a similar report, you want to report that information in a consistent way. So the fourth thing is you want to achieve meaningful and relevant numbers. And again, all of these are kind of linked together, but Bolton presented me with a law, De Urioste's law. It says there is no such thing as a standalone number. So with that meaningful and relevant numbers, you don't want standalone numbers. You want numbers that are meaningful. So another deadly sin of his is presenting numbers with no context whatsoever. So no comparison to prior periods, no comparison to a plan or budget, no comparison to competitors. So that would be a deadly sin. You want your numbers to be meaningful. You want them to connect with a total, to prior information. You want useful information. Another deadly sin in that area that he listed was omitting totals where appropriate, and then presenting totals where they are not appropriate. So just be conscious of what you're totaling and where you're totaling it, because usually that totals is a important area, and that's where your audience may focus their attention. So you want those totals to be correct. And then the last thing is going to be you want to respect the audience's time. I'm sure a lot of you have been in the business world and have bosses, and they don't have a lot of time. And it's not necessarily just bosses, anybody. You don't want to waste anyone's time. So respect their time. Whenever you're gathering these reports, putting these reports together, presenting numbers, you want to think of how you can save your audience time. You want to keep the tables, figures to one page. You don't want multiple page figures, tables, statements. You want to, if it is a larger report, a larger document, have a table of contents, have a cover memo. Even if it's even larger, have divider tabs. And then also, whenever you're distributing this information, you can save some time. So obviously, hard copies is going to be the best way for most people. But sometimes information isn't important enough for a hard copy, or it's just not feasible to have a hard copy and get that to somebody. So email and attachment is obviously another good way to do that. And obviously it does depend on the importance of the information. So that's about it for me. We went through the first 4 chapters of the Painting with Numbers book, and it had some good information. Obviously, it's a little bit of dry information. It might not spark the conversation on the discussion boards, but I will get a discussion going out there, and hopefully you gain something from it. It is interesting, just the quantitation and how to present that the best way. So hopefully you learned something. Hop on the discussion board. Good luck to everybody else with their presentations, and thanks for listening.